All right, appreciate you guys coming on, listening. Today we're going to be talking about preparing and defending for an OSHA visit and citation. So we'll be covering a lot of information, so I want you to jump in, ask questions. It might be clumsy when we have a call. Just go ahead and just yell out. We'll work through it. Want to make sure that you're learning something. If you don't feel like you're learning anything, you can hang up the phone and log off. I won't be offended. All right, so let's get started. Today's webinar is brought to you by the sponsors: Dow Building Solutions, Easy Grout Corporation, Kennison Forest Products, Old Castle, Nonstop, MortarNet, Quickcrete, Spec Mix, and Tradesman Software. First thing I want to tell you is that I'm not an attorney. My background is in mason contracting and families in the business. I've worked in the field for nearly 17 years, went back to school, got a degree. Now I'm the director here at St. Louis Mason Contractors Association. And most of what I've learned about safety is going to come from our partnership, which was formed in 2003. And I'll be writing an article about our partnership in the masonry issue, the July issue. These safety webinars are every third Tuesday of the month. And next month, Mark Kemp will be giving the next one. And in July 17th, Mike McNicky with our area office here, he'll be discussing building and safety, health, culture. All right. So let's get started. OSHA covers everybody pretty much. If you employ one employee, you're covered by OSHA. There's federal programs and there's state programs. What I'm going to talk about today is the federal program, but the state programs have to be a minimum of the federal program. So in theory, everything I talk about should apply. So you can see there, wherever your state is, the yellow and orange, those are federal programs, and the green are the state programs. All right. So OSHA visits and citations, they're done by people, so this makes it highly subjective, and at times it can be confusing. So what is it that we're really being held to? So the Act has a general duty clause in there, and this is what the employer is being held to. He shall furnish to each of his employees employment a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death, physical harm to his employees. So recognized hazards is key in this clause. The second, under Section 5A, shall comply with occupational safety and health standards promulgated under this Act. So with those two paragraphs, we've got place, which is the work site, and number 2 is the standards that we work under. The standards, it's Section 1926. There's three major sets of standards. There's general industry, which is 1910, maritime, and construction. For construction, that's all we're concerned with, and that's 1926. Yeah. Section 5B of the General Duty Clause states that each employee shall comply with occupational safety and health standards and all rules, regulations, and orders issued pursuant to the Act which are applicable to his own actions and conduct. So what we're saying here is that employees have some responsibility in this also.
And the email I sent you.
If anybody's got any questions or anything like that, just jump in there and yell it out. I'm going to move pretty quickly. But if I'm going too fast, slow me down. So there's different types of job site visits. There's programmed visits, which are local emphasis programs. For example, in the St. Louis area, there's a local emphasis program for residential construction in Jefferson and St. Charles County. So what does that mean? That means that compliance officers from OSHA will drive around in those areas looking for construction sites, residential construction sites, and pulling permits any way that they can find residential sites. And then there's also national emphasis programs and special emphasis programs, and these may be, I believe there's right now a national emphasis for refineries. We don't have too many refineries here, but down in Texas, Zach, you may have guys working at refineries. There's also unprogrammed visits, and these are a visit that you'll get because of a fatality or a catastrophe. A catastrophe is 3 or more going to the hospital. Complaints, where an employee or somebody may complain to OSHA, or a referral. So it could come from maybe the fire marshal did a walkthrough for a fire inspection, or a code official on a job site. He may saw some kind of hazard and reported it. Priority that they take, they've only got so much time and they have to categorize and use their resources. So the ones that are imminent dangerous situations, they go first. Fatalities and catastrophes next. Complaints, referrals, follow-ups, plans, and programs. There's 3 different types of inspections that you'll see here, and this is important. There's a comprehensive inspection. There's a partial inspection. So, for example, if you get a complaint, a partial inspection to come and visit the site regarding that complaint. Then there's a Focus 4 inspection. Typically, what you're going to get is a Focus 4. In our area, it's typical for a Focus 4. That's a struck by, caught between, fall hazard, electrocution. Now, a compliance, safety, and health officer, OSHA, that's the term that's used for OSHA, they'll be prepared when they visit your site. They would have already searched on the companies for inspection history, and they would have been watching the site in advance. In other words, they either have videotape or they've got photos going at this time. Before they come on the job site, they most likely have these things with them. When they do show up on the job site, hopefully the employees on the job know what to do, and this is what happens on the job. There should be an opening conference. So that compliance officer is on the job, should be showing you the credentials, and having an opening conference with you. Then there's going to be a walk around and then a closing conference. I'll go through each one of these real quick. The opening conference is important because it is going to set the tone. Remember that this whole process is very, very subjective. So in a sense, you need to build a rapport with this compliance officer very quickly. At this time, you can ask for a warrant if you want, but you need careful consideration for that. You may be in an indoor type of situation where you may only have 1 day left, and there's something that you really don't want them to see. So I just throw that out there. I don't recommend it. You want careful consideration with that. During the opening conference, though, you do want to ask questions. You want to ask them if this is a focused visit or a comprehensive visit. You want to know the reason for the visit. Is it programmed, or is there a complaint, or what's the reason for them being here? If it's unprogrammed, you'll know it's a fatality. You would have already known that. But if it's a complaint, you can request a copy of the complaint. And they're there for that complaint. So they're there to come and visit that complaint. Now, they can expand at that time. They can expand their inspection if they see something that's dangerous and that's out of place. So they should be there only for that, but they can't expand it. So you need to know that. We've already talked about referrals. So why is all this important? This is important because you're trying to narrow down the reasons why they're there and to kind of keep them to where it is that they're talking to, the reasons why they're there. Next thing is that there's going to be a walk around. So the representative from the company from the employer, which in our instance is many times going to be the foreman, he should walk around with the co-show. And if the compliance officer takes a picture, the foreman should take the same picture. The compliance officer will probably do some interviews. He'll do some one-on-one interviews and get some information from your employees. There's also going to be a closing conference. And this is important too, because you need to know, you want to ask, are there any apparent violations? And you want to keep notes. You want to keep good notes. And the reason you ask for any apparent violations is so you know what they've seen. OSHA is supposed to be about abatement. So if they see something and they don't tell you about it, that's not a very good practice because you can't abate it because you're not aware of it. So you want to ask that question before they leave and keep good notes. Many times, I tell you what happens a lot of times is that there'll be a visit, the foreman has an impression of one thing, and then when a citation comes later, it's totally different than what has been described. So we want to keep notes. This is just a fact sheet that anybody can get to. OSHA's got a very nice website. You can get to the fact sheets, and it has pretty much everything that we just kind of talked about regarding the visits. Okay.
Hey,
now,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say that generally when we hear that OSHA's on one of our projects, we have our foreman contact the general contractor, the CM, and ask for them to stall or hold him in the trailer till we have time to send somebody from our office there.
That's fine, Mark.
Something we do, and we take pictures. If they take a picture, we take a picture.
That's not a bad practice, Mark. I mean, if you have that in place, I think that's good. Sometimes, sometimes in our experience, somebody will say, OSHA's on the job, everybody off the scaffold.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's a bad practice. That may be easier to get interviews or something of that nature. Or if you see a hazard up there, you might want to come down so that you're not getting in the picture of a hazard. But remember, they've already taken pictures. So typically, you certainly don't want to run away from the job. You want to go ahead and, engage with the compliance officer and get on with the inspection. That's a good practice, though, Mark. You can do that. You can request that a representative from the company come out. I think, what did they give you, Mark, about an hour?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just call them co-show. You guys will know that I'm talking about a compliance officer. They're collecting data. That's their job. They're paperwork people, and they're very good at it. So they're gathering information that tries to show that the employer knew of the hazardous condition. Now, what's important about this is that when we say employer, that means writing boss, foreman, or superintendent. You guys are acting, a lot of the employees are acting in agency for here. So just because the contractor's not on the job, they're responsible through his company. All right. Okay, they're also collecting data, what reasonable steps the employer failed to take. So the idea is that they are collecting data that tries to demonstrate that you're not doing what you're really supposed to be doing according to the standards. So they're not only looking to see the violation, and all this comes from the field operation manual. And that's online, and you guys can get online and look at the field operation manual. It's kind of the tell-all of how they need to operate. So let me give you an example. I've got a local case here. This has nine items on one citation, and the first one says frequent and regular inspections of the job site materials and equipment was not made by a competent person designated by the employer. The employer did not ensure job site inspections were accomplished before employees started working. So this is the type of data that they're going to be collecting. They're going to be looking for the processes that you implement in order to make sure that you have a safe work site. Okay. All right, the mere presence of the employer in the workplace is not sufficient enough. And remember, I'm reading from the field operation manual. So this is for the COSHO as he's gathering data. So there must be evidence that demonstrates why the employer reasonably could have recognized the presence of a hazardous condition. So maybe, let's say, for example, maybe we got a laborer that's shifting block through a window for an elevator shaft, let's say. I'm just making this up. And maybe there's maybe he's under someone else's scaffold, or maybe there's somebody working on a roof overhead. And maybe the way they demonstrate that you knew of this hazard, they'll interview that employee and ask why is he there doing it, and the foreman told him to go ahead and shift the block through there. That may be one example. The same thing for a fireplace or anything like that. The last thing is that the COSHO is supposed to avoid using statements like reasonable diligence. In other words, they need to have the data that goes ahead and tries to get the case to stick. So let me just do a little quick recap. We've got a visit for whatever reason that they've showed up on your job, whether it's programmed, unprogrammed, or what have you. We've got an opening, we've got a walk around, and we've got a closing, right? The COSHO's been building a case the whole time. All right, there's a 6-month statute on when you can receive. So if they come on the job site, they do their inspection, they got up to 6 months to send that citation out. Now, a lot can happen and memories fade, and that's an awful long time. I don't see them at 6 months, but I have seen them probably around 3 months. Mark, have you received a citation in the past?
Yes.
What was your experience? Did you see?
I would say generally within 6 weeks we get something.
Okay, good. Okay, so then you're going to get the results from the inspection, and you're either going to have a violation or not. And so no violations, and this really does happen. We get several inspections in our area, and no violations will arise. That should be applauded. However, the topic for us today is receiving a citation that demonstrates a violation. So there's different types of violations, and this is important. They're listed either serious, other than serious, a repeat, a willful, which you knew, or there was a plain disregard, and then there's a general duty. Remember when we were reading through the general duty clause, that's kind of the overriding clause of what's expected of us. All your citations will be written off of the standards from 1926. However, if there's an instance where they can't find the standard to cite you on, they can always cite you on the general duty, underneath the general duty clause. And that might be something like ergonomics. So if you get an ergonomics type citation, it's probably going to come under the general duty clause. All right, so you received it. This is a sample. I don't know if you can see it. This is just a little sample here. This is probably what you'll receive is probably going to be about 15 pages long. And on the left-hand document that you see there where my cursor is, you're going to have the right for an informal conference. It's got to be within 15 days. That's very key, 15 days. You should write that down. When you receive that, you need to know when you received it because you got 15 business days to contest this. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. You have some options. You can either accept it, you can request the informal conference. That's the 15 days I was talking about. You can contest it or you can ignore it. If you ignore it, it's the same as accepting it. I went back to the document. On the right, this was towards the end of the 15 pages that you would have received, and this is you can see it's a total. They say one citation. This is one citation with 9 items, and it was for $32,940. and that's for a very small residential masonry contractor here in our area. So, like I said, I'm not an attorney, but from our experience here, the best thing that the next approach, the next step that I would take is to request that informal conference. So, you know, why should we request the informal conference? Because the area director, that's the guy running that office, they can cut a deal with you the way that they see fit. So I'm just going to read a little bit as we go through some of these. Except for egregious cases or cases that affect other jurisdictions, the area director may enter into informal settlement agreements with employers prior to the employer filing a written notice of contest. Now, an informal conference does not have to be physically in their office. It can be a phone call. It could be a meeting anywhere that you guys come up with. There's no real hard, fast rules for an informal conference that I know of, and it can take place anywhere. The area director may amend, abate, date, reclassify violations. So remember the willful, he can move a willful to serious or serious to other than serious, and he can modify or withdraw a penalty, a citation or a citation item, where evidence established during the informal conference that the changes are justified. So we're at the informal conference, and we're trying to prove our case. He can actively negotiate the amount of proposed penalties depending on the circumstances of the cases and the particular improvements in employee safety and health that can be obtained. So the improvements, what does that mean? That would go directly to your good faith, the employer's good faith efforts. The violations that you get have a maximum penalty for a serious. This is per item, so you can get one citation with 9 items. So you can have, for a serious, you can have $7,000 per violation. Other than serious, $7,000. Willful or repeated, $70,000. And posting requirements, $7,000. And a failure to abate. Now, right before this conference call, right before this webinar, one of my contractors sent over to me a newsletter that he receives from forceconstructionpros.com. And this was May 10th, and it says OSHA proposes $154,440 in fines for Pennsylvania contractor. So it cites Quality Stone Veneer, that's the name of the company, with 8 safety violations and scaffold hazards during construction at a residential site. Underneath this, he has one. So this is a mason contractor that does stone installation. The first one that he's cited for, the willful violation is failing to implement fall arrest systems and provide guardrails for employees working on scaffolds more than 10 feet above the lower level. A willful violation is one committed with intentional, knowing, or voluntary disregard for the law's requirements or with plain indifference to workers' safety and health. This citation alone carries $69,300. So that's pertinent to what we're talking about today. These types of fines do happen. We've had one here locally, a guy he's in the 300,000s. He's kind of a rogue restoration contractor, and I've had contractors in my organization here receive over $100,000 fine. So it does happen. Under Section 17J of the Act, it provides that the penalty shall be assessed given due consideration to 4 factors. Now these are important. So that number 1 is the gravity of the violation. Number 2 is the size of the employer's business. Number 3 is the good faith of the employer. And number 4, the employer's history of previous violations. So these are all things that can adjust the proposed violation, the proposed citation, the proposed penalty. These things can adjust. Here's a penalty table, and I'm just going to show you this quickly. this comes right out of that document. So let's say that you got $1,000 right there, top left-hand corner. You can have adjustments of 10%, 15%. You can go all the way to 95%. You cannot go over 100%. So just generally speaking, and you could find this. You could find this in the same document. We're talking about a maximum of 60% reduction is permitted for size of your company. A maximum of 35% reduction for good faith. 10% reduction may be given for history, and there can be a 10% for those in the partnership. So there are others. There are other ones I'm not going to get into. Those are the ones that are generally looked at. So I guess the idea is to let you know that there is movement in these penalties. So when you're at the informal conference, you're trying to justify any changes that you think that you can have changed. Like we said, he can change the type of violation, he can change the penalty amount, and he can throw it out. Also, when you're there, we're trying to make sure that everything that you're being cited for is correct, the information is correct. You want to make sure that you're not getting cited for something that is unrelated to what it is that you're doing. Okay. Under C, there are additional facts not available to the COSHO at the time of the inspections to establish a valid affirmative defense. Okay, that's important. That's a technical term. That's a valid affirmative defense, and we'll get into that. Also, additional facts not available to the COSHO at the time of the inspection that establishes there was no employee exposure to the hazard. So, for example, they may have a picture of you got a frame set up, but it may not be fully planked. They have a picture of that. That could be a hazard. However, there's no employees in the picture. There's nobody on the scaffold, and since there are no employees in the area, there's no exposure. So just because they cite it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an exposure there. Okay, you're also wanting, you're bringing the most information that you can. So our goals are, number one, when you go to an informal, we want to, number one, try to get your citations thrown out. Okay, if you're unsuccessful in that, we want to the severities. We want to change the implications of it. And number three, we want to get those penalties reduced. Okay, so an affirmative defense, like we said before. An affirmative defense is a claim which is established by the employer and found to exist by the COSHO, which will excuse the employer from a citation that has otherwise been documented. Okay, so the burden of proof falls to the employer. It always comes down to the employer. He needs to prove his affirmative defense at the time of the hearing. But the COSHO, remember, he's been anticipating this from the time he came onto your job site. So you need to raise arguments that support such a defense. We already talked about this. He'll bring all the documentation to the informal so you guys can discuss it, bring it to the area director. Now there's three affirmative defenses. One is infeasibility, two is greater hazard, and three is employee misconduct. I'm going to go through them quickly. Infeasibility is pretty much what it says. You can't do it. We can't put a safety practice in place that's infeasible, and it would create a worse situation. So we can't prevent it. There's no alternative means. This is hardly ever used. I've never seen it used, but it is certainly one defense. Greater hazard is exactly what that says. Compliance with the standard would result in a greater hazard. Here again, I've never seen this used. I don't think it's used too often, but it is certainly a defense. Now, employee misconduct, this is the third one. This is the most common one to be used. And we're going to go through this one and explain this one a little more in depth. So to establish the defense in most jurisdictions, employers must show all the following elements. A work rule to prevent a violation was in place. Effective communication of the rule to the employees. Methods for discovering violations of work rules, and effective enforcement of rules when violations are discovered. Okay, so there's three things really. We've listed four, but there's really three things that you need to be cognizant of. Number one, you need to have a health and safety plan. Okay, that would also contain management commitment. So I'm the contractor, this is important to me, and here's our health and safety plan. Number two, it has to be communicated to the employees. That means that they understand there's a rule and they have the tools and training to implement what it is that you're asking of them to do. And then number three, and this is the hardest one for us because everybody in our industry seems to be related, it's enforcement. We have to have an escalating enforcement program in your plan. So what makes it hard is, okay, look, I've told you for the third time to put your hard hat on. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go home for a day with no pay, Dad, or Uncle Bob, or Brother Larry. It happens. That's the hardest part, but it has to be done. Okay, so let's look at an example. The citation comes, and we'll just say that the guardrails are down and it presents a serious hazard, right? The contractor is going to request the informal, and it's going to be within 15 days. So remember, you got to document when you receive your citation. It'll come certified, so you'll probably have good documentation already. But you got 15 working days, not including federal holidays. Okay? So the employer has, number one, he's got a well-written health and safety plan that specifically addresses fall protection. Okay? Number two, the employer has records that show the rule's been communicated. In other words, the employees have read and understand the safety and health plan, and they've received training in scaffolding, erection, and use. And number three, the employer has records that show an escalating disciplinary policy to demonstrate enforcement of the health and safety plan. So you want to have a written documentation, even if it's verbal. Say if you have an escalating plan, it's a verbal, then a written, and then another written with a day off, or whatever the plan is. You want to have a note in the file in order to demonstrate that, so that when you go in, if you have these things, if you have what we just discussed, the citation for fall protection, and you're able to demonstrate the three things that we talked about, the three legs to the stool, that means a health and safety plan, it's well communicated, they have the tools to do it, and you've got a escalating enforcement that demonstrates that you're trying to implement this down through your company. That citation should go away. And in our experience, it does. Here's just an example of a written or verbal safety deficiency notice that you can go ahead and keep in your file. So the bottom line is your best defense is doing the three things that we talked about. Got to have a plan, has to be communicated, and you have to enforce it. With those three things, that is your defenses. That is your affirmative defense. And if you have those, you're in a much greater position to, number one, eliminate the citation, or have, and if you can't do that, you can have it reduced from serious to other than serious, or you can have that penalty reduced up to 95%. So there's the takeaway. Three legs to the stool, well-written health and safety plan, communicated, your employees understand, the employees have the tools to do what you're asking, and you need to enforce the plan. If you have those three things right there, it's pretty simple. If you have those three things, you're in a very good position. That's it. How about any questions? I explained it so well.
You did an awesome job.
All right. I'll just give you a couple other notes. I don't think I've seen a citation that comes with less than four items on a citation. And when they do come, it'll be in the upwards of anywhere from 10 to 30 to 40, $50,000. Remember that this is a subjective process. So in other words, the people that are implementing the inspections and the citations, they're just people trying to do their job, and you want to try to work with them so that you get the best look from them. That's pretty much the bottom line. If you need to bring an attorney, they probably don't care to have an attorney, especially at the informal, but if you feel like you need to, they're not opposed to it. Myself here, I don't, for our contractors here, the first thing is not to bring in an attorney, just to go have a conversation to make sure that the facts are straight. What are we looking at? Because when you go to the informal, it's not going to get worse. They're not going to say, oh, now we're going to jack up the citations. What's done is done already. So to go in and have a discussion about what we can do right here is the best approach that we use around here.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Employee acknowledgement of this plan. Do you think, we have the training rosters where we, go through training, but then we've also started producing, quizzes, tests. Would that be sufficient for acknowledgement of the plan, do you think?
Yeah. Anything that you can do to raise awareness is good. So toolbox talks, any formal training. You said that you were taking some tests. Can you explain that to me?
We started making them take, not hard quizzes, but just something as a record of what they took away. And
yeah, I think it's all a good idea. Anything that you can do to demonstrate that you're trying to raise awareness to recognized hazards. So remember, that's what we're required to do, is provide a safe workplace from recognized hazards. So any training that we can do that's to the recognized hazards, and then you have documentation of that, that helps establish your affirmative defense, that you're trying to do the right thing. So we got employee goodwill. You're able to demonstrate that we do have the training, and even if it's 15, 20 minutes, and you've got your inspection sheets from the job site, all that will go a long way for you when you go to the informal.
Okay.
See, that when you go to the informal, they don't want to go to court. So what they do is they're trying to see what they can make stick and what they can't make stick. So if you have everything set up like the general duty clause is asking you to do, they've got nothing. So they know when they go to court that they'll lose, and they don't want to do that. And the only way it goes to court is it's implemented by the employer, so the employer will push it to the court. So hopefully you don't have to get to that point. But your question about having tests and going through that education is a very good idea.
Good.
Who's next?
Hey, Dave, this is Zach. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
One thing that they are doing more just recently, and I've heard it from others and experienced it as well, is anytime there's an inspection, they're asking for your record keeping now. And they're producing a lot of citations off of incorrect paperwork. And when I mean incorrect, I don't mean just trying to hide something. If you didn't, complete a particular form just right, you left off his date of hire, you thought you'd come back and get it, but you just left it off, or something's not just picture perfect on your logs, they will write that as a citation, and they'll produce. I'm hearing this more and more about them utilizing that little effort to get more citations out there.
Well, Zach, I don't know if you guys train on record keeping. We've done training on record keeping several times around here, and I guess you could be cited on that. And it's not as simple as it may sound, but it's not as complicated as many may think also. If you have a process in place, in other words, to the far left, if you have an incident to the very far left, it's going to say a little short line that you're supposed to make a notation on what type of a form or where that form is that you filled out. Some people will use the OSHA form. Other people will use the workers' comp form. As long as that system's in place, you know, and you're going to make mistakes on the record keeping because it can get complicated. That's okay. If you make a mistake, you're not supposed to erase it. You just line through it. So you can still read it, but line through it. And it's going to happen, but I don't see many of those, Zach. And if we did, we would probably produce the records that we trained on it. We're trying to do the best that we can, employer goodwill. And, you know, there's not a real, you know, you're supposed to do it, and I don't know, I've never been to that one, Zach, so I don't know what kind of a fine that would be or anything, because I don't know where the exposure to get a great fine, because the gravity of that one would be very low.
Yeah, it would be very low, but just we had an inspection here a while back on one of our jobs, and they didn't find anything, but they still, well, they didn't find anything for us, but they still asked for every subcontractor and the general's paperwork, and I think you're right. I think it's probably other than serious citation, but still it seems to be a little bit hotter pursuit these days.
Well, it could be an excuse for them to expand the inspection. You know, if you're on a job site that's more than a year long, you need to have your logs and everything on that job site, right? So if you know, if they, a lot of times that's where they'll start. They'll see, let me see your safety and health plan. Let me see your logs. And so if those aren't in order, that could be just the reason that they want in order to expand, go from a focused inspection to a comprehensive.
All right, Dave, we have another question for you from Dan. It's a type question, and it's asking you to go over the reasons for a visit. Besides fatality, can they just show up?
Yeah, they can. Let me get back up there. They've got programmed and unprogrammed, right? And they can just show up because if they see a hazard on the scaffold, by statute, they either need to stop and inspect that right now, because they can't let that hazard go by. I mean, they swear to these things, right? They raise their right hand, this, that, and the other. If they see a scaffold, it needs to either put on a program, or they need to stop, or they need to put it on a program type of inspection. That's the reason why, for us, it's important. We're always on the scaffold. We're always highly visible. So we're going to be a high target. And, you know, with less work right now, any work that we get, we're going to be seeing more. So, yes, the answer is yes, they can just stop. They can just stop. Now, I see where that question comes from, the residential contractor, and in our area, residential construction is a local emphasis program in St. Charles and Jefferson County. Did that answer the question?
Yes. Yeah. Jim Cook, did you get your question answered?
No, he didn't. The
okay.
question.
No, I didn't get it answered. I've got a comment about what the lady said about how you do the acknowledgement thing, whether your employees acknowledge that they understand your safety and health program. And the way we handle that is for all new employees, get a copy of our safety and health program. The last page in it has got an acknowledgement form that we put in the employee's file. So, and it says that, yes, I've received the safety and health program, I've read it and understand it. So that combined with our toolbox talks, they wind up having a pretty good knowledge of what our rules and regulations are, and avoid being cited for that, that using that method.
That's very good practice.
My question, I had come up with it earlier, and while you were talking about when a compliance officer takes a picture on the job, who's ever escorting him, the employer, should also take a picture of the same thing. And how about when an employee is interviewed by a compliance officer? Should we also be asking that employee what was, what they talked about?
Jim, I'm going to answer that question like this. I don't know. I don't think it would be a good idea because, that's a highly protected type of a situation. But, I don't know the answer to that one, but I could probably look into it and get it to Jeff, and he can get it to you.
I mean, I know you can't harass them about, what something they've said to them, but just simply asking them what was discussed. I know that in the closing conference, if there's a problem, it'll probably be brought up, but just finding out what they talked about, so what the employee said to the compliance officer when it comes time to go into the informal conference, if there's a difference in what the employee says and what the compliance office is alleging was said.
Mm-hmm. And there's always that never seems to line up, no matter how much that we try to remember or anything like that. So that's why that opening conference, that walk around, and that closing conference is very important, so that we can get as close to the facts as we possibly can. Because my experience, it never comes out the same as what somebody's explained to me. The pictures don't show what was explained to me. Let me put it to you that way.
If I could speak to that, they address that very issue. At least you can infer something from it through the 10 and 30-hour outreach classes when you're teaching Introduction to OSHA, and I teach those all the time. They say that the OSHA has the right to talk confidentially with the employee, and there's nothing saying that you can't ask them, hey, what was said? But if the employee doesn't want to say, they don't have to, and we have, as an employer, have a responsibility not to reprise in any way. So there's nothing wrong with asking the employee, hey, what was said? But if he says, I want to keep it anonymous, that's his right as an employee.
Okay, I got you.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach.
We have one other comment, too, just looks like more of a comment than a question, and that is it is a good idea to make sure you have the MSDS forms available, because they do ask for those as well. All right, other questions or other concerns? And we can go off of, we don't have to stick to Dave's presentation. At this point, we can open it up for the open forum part where we just throw things out there if people have questions or if they have comments about things they may be seeing in their local areas. This is the time to bring it all up.
Jeff, you want to give just an update on our visit last week in D.C. regarding the head of OSHA?
We did meet with the Directorate of Construction Services with OSHA last week in D.C. It was more of a get to kind of know you type of a meeting with that Directorate of Construction Services to try to build a relationship there. We discussed several different items. Some of the things that OSHA is providing, some of the things that they're working on, some PR camp type things. And you'll see some of that stuff come out in one of our safety newsletters coming up real soon here with some links and those types of things. Dave, do you want to share any of your thoughts? Because I know you were involved with a lot of the conversation as well. I mean, it was a nice, formal little way to get to know each other. He was kind of preoccupied with the I think it was ACOSH, an ACOSH conference.
Well, I think one of the important things that comes out of that meeting, which is no surprise, is that, he says, hey, look, our policies seem to change every 4 years. So it's important for us to vote, right? Because, OSHA was put in place for enforcement. And it seems that if the Democrats are, if it's Democratic administration, it seems like enforcement is a higher priority. If it's a Republican administration, it seems to be more friendly, business-friendly type of thing where we can have more partnerships and, outreach, some more better understanding. That was probably the most important thing. It was nice. It was nice for him to listen to us and to put a face on masonry to the new director and just to say hello and open the door for future discussion.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is that the old director of the construction services we had a pretty good relationship with, and he did leave shortly after the administration change. So, if it changes again, I would imagine we get a new director of construction services again. Although Jim Maddox seemed like a pretty decent guy, he's closed-minded around. That was a positive. Zach, do you want to comment on anything? I know you stuck around a bit afterwards.
I would just say that it was a great introductory meeting. I think it needs to happen. I would like to see that happen annually. And if anyone, and it doesn't have to be just by, me or Jeff or Dave. As people make trips to that area, even if it's, just stick your head in and say hello to whoever we can with OSHA specifically. If we can get contacts that will get to know us, that'll pay dividends in the future. I'm convinced.
All right.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a question kind of off topic to the legislative conference, but as far as OSHA goes, in my local market, I'm in the D.C. market, and I'm hearing from my safety consultant that OSHA's really cracking down on silica exposure. And recently said that a local silica exposure. And recently a local masonry guy got cited because his mortar man making mortar did not have a fitted respirator.
Okay, let me chime in on that.
Okay.
From the Milwaukee area, and what we did with our association is, you're right, they will try to stick you with a citation for that, but if you have done any monitoring of the silicosis, we have found that you're in compliance without a respirator. In other words, you shouldn't have to wear one. In an 8-hour day, you're under the Pell. Now, if it's a windy day and that wind is blowing into the fellow's face and all of the powder is blowing on him, that's a different scenario. Then I would suggest you wear a 100 rated mask. I would not recommend a respirator because that's a whole different program then.
Yeah.
Just a comment. Mark said PEL, it's permissible exposure limit. But also, when you're talking about a respiratory protection program and you put on a dust mask that's different than a respirator, a one-strap dust mask is just that. When you have a 4-point, in other words, 2 straps, 2 rubber bands on there, then that turns into the respiratory. Then you need to have a program that goes along with that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's a 100, not a 99, or 95 won't work. You have to have 99, I think it is.
If it's
okay, so I don't
fit it and have a doctor sign off on it. Pretty sure.
Okay, so
if
I get.
Go ahead.
We just hired an industrial hygienist to come do testing on our job site because we kept getting into this. If we don't have paperwork that documents we're under, specifically the spec mix, the grout, and we just got, tired of wondering what were our exact levels. So we tested. So, and we were, for our products, well under the limit.
Where you get into it, and we've done the same. We've done it with dry cutting too. And if you're doing an occasional cut up on the scaffold, one guy cuts one course on the other side of the scaffold, another guy's cutting the next course, you're going to be under the Pell. If you put a guy on a saw, continuously, for 2 hours straight, I don't think you're going to be over the Pell at that point. You will be.
We tested that as well. We tested that, and we were under as well.
You were under. Okay, and another big variable is the aggregate that you're using. That plays into it. But you're right. If you can establish all of that and share it with, if you have a contractors association, share all of that, and then that way it's all on file for everybody to use. That's a great approach.
Can I ask who the lady was talking?
I'm with DNS Masonry. I'm Stacy Johnson.
Stacy, and you're with who?
P&S Masonry in Texas?
Paul and Susie?
Yeah.
The Paul and Susie show starring Paul and Susie?
You got it.
Hey,
You got it.
Zach, you there?
Yeah.
Do you think it would be a good idea for your committee to maybe gather up, put some feelers out to see if there is some data out there that we could create a library that we could all rely upon, that we could at least have some indication of where we're exposed, or maybe we could use it in defense?
You know, when we wrote
Absolutely.
the Silica document, you know, which was later adopted by ASTM, we had all that information. Jeff, I don't know if we still have it, if Rashad's got it.
I'd have to pull the documents, but I'm pretty sure we have it. But I
Okay.
know that there are, the Chicago group has done studies. If your
Right.
group have done studies, Mark, and if Texas has done studies, I think we should try to pull our information together from every part of the country. And if everything's saying the same thing, then I think we need to go visit OSHA and DC again and try to them about getting not even a waiver, but say, hey, you know, this is what all of our studies have shown, and we're still getting harassed by it. They're still trying to cite us for it, and we want to see if we can clarify this issue with you guys on these different tasks. Now, I know that I know that silica is an issue down the road, that they're trying to lower the PELs, the PELs, but that's a whole other issue. And during our experience in D.C., many congressmen said, let us know if that starts to rear its ugly head again, because we'll introduce legislation to beat it back. So we have some friends out there legislatively who say that they can knock it right off of OSHA's radar to increase the PEL limits. So we felt pretty good about that coming out of it, and we're going to be working on that as well. But if you do have studies, if you guys have done them and you're willing to share them, I think that's, if we get a bunch of information from all over the country that's showing that these limits aren't being exceeded, I think we can possibly do something in D.C. with OSHA.
Okay, Jeff, can you, if we send it directly to you, are you the source to collect it and keep it, or?
I mean, we'd be happy to combine it here, and I know Tim's on, and maybe it's something we'd even post on our website in our password protected area for members only, so that if members do get cited, they can go start pulling documents down, and they can help battle or bring up a defense for themselves too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So I would strongly encourage you. I mean, I'll go out and I'll try to solicit from all the chapters if they've done studies to please submit them. But like Stacy, if you guys have something, or if your guys' companies have done something, please by all means let us know, and we'll try to gather the information.
Absolutely. I will get that information to Paul and let him send it your way.
Sounds great. Anything else? Wide open. Everybody good?
I'm good.
1 hour.
All right. Until next time, we will then be adjourned.
Yeah, the next topic will be on accident investigation.
Very good, Mark.
All right.
Thank you. This is
Thank
Jeff.
you.
I want to say thank you.
Take care.